Welcome back to the Root Cause Podcast. I'm your host, Callie Whitwell, and today I have on a very special guest who tells a heart-wrenching story about the struggles that his son has faced throughout a tragic accident and how he pushed through his farming career. Today with me, I have returning guest, Caleb Dinwiddie, and I have a new guest, Mr. Mike Burkhart, a retired Indiana farmer. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, like she said, I'm from Indiana. I'm from southwest Indiana, which is 100 miles southwest of Indianapolis and 60 miles northeast of Evansville. I lived on the farm my entire life, grew up on that same farm, have a house just down the driveway. From an early age, that was pretty much where, we learned how to live on a farm and do the things that we needed to do. And how things happened at our farm, it seemed like from day one, it seemed like there was always some kind of struggle. And I mean, when I say struggle, not farm related, but life related. At a very young age, I had an older brother that passed away, and he passed away on the family farm. So that ended up that was an impact not only to me, but I was younger than him, and I was only 2 at the time, so I don't remember. But my brother was 5, my older brother. So the impact that it had on him with nightmares and that type of thing, I remember him waking up in the middle of the night. But we have farmed there in southwest Indiana for a long period of time. I'm a 5th generation farmer. My brother and I started farming together. I was in 5th grade whenever we first started raising hogs together on contract. My dad had his first massive heart attack at the age of 36. So life had kind of changed for us at that point, but we've always raised corn, wheat, and beans. We've always been anything that we could do to make extra money, but we had cattle early on. And then in 1978, why we had major snowstorms that kind of wiped out our cattle herd. So, but whenever Dad had his heart attack, I would have been in 7th grade. And so it was an issue, a rheumatic issue. He was doing some custom work, and he ended up that he had a massive heart attack and ended up at the hospital. He actually died that day, and they shocked him and brought him back. But it kind of set the stage for, starting with my young brother. But farming had always been the background of what we did. But we also kind of learned how to adjust and deal with problems in our life at an early time. And you always tried to focus on, okay, let's find a positive out of this and let's run with it the best we can. Our background with religion was always a big part of it, because there's times in life that you have to turn it over to somebody else. So we learned that sometimes you just have to turn to a higher power and say, okay, I can't control it, I can't fix it, so let's turn it over to somebody else. So as life had went on, we was raising food grade white corn, we was raising seed beans, my brother and I, but then it ended up that my dad passed away in 1986. Well, farming starting in the 80s was an interesting time to start farming. And then to have the fact that you got a farm now that you got to take over. So that becomes an issue at a young age. You're starting to learn. But, whenever Dad had his first heart attack, we got thrown into the fire pretty quick. We had livestock to take care of before we went to school. And we had livestock to take care of when we got home from school. But yet, whenever Dad, my brother and I was trying to do the farming because his health was pretty bad. And so we was trying to offset all of that time. But, we both had desires to go to college and do different things. But we realized that whenever he passed away in 86, that life changes and you make adjustments. And so I got married in 1982, got 4 great kids, but we've ended up that through that period of time, why we, through farming and going through the struggles that we went through, you try to figure out what the next steps look like. And so it seemed like every time we turned around, there was another adjustment and another adjustment.
So let's go back to the first set of your family. They've been on the same property for 5 generations?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, what year was that?
As far back as I can take it, I got back to right at 1900. But whenever you start doing genealogy, you start dealing with maiden names, and so I lose it, and I haven't dove off in it any deeper than that. But
yeah, I always appreciate people. The northern people understand their heritage better than we do here. I'm a second generation farmer, so yeah, it's 5 generations. That's 100 years, 125 years. So that's a big long time.
Yeah, I had a great uncle. And him and his wife were born in the late 1800s. And my wife and I was talking about just the other day, look at the changes. We think we've been through a lot of changes in our lifetime, but go back to theirs. They started out, they went from horses to automobiles to tractors. They was at a time whenever airplanes come on, is at a time when World War I, they went through Depression, they went through the market crash of the 20s, they went through World War II, and Vietnam and the Korean War, and you look at all the changes, and having, electricity come into the house, phones come into the house, things that we all take for granted, and indoor plumbing.
Yeah.
And the changes that they went through is amazing. Whenever I think about some of the changes that we've experienced, but that was a whole nother generation.
Yeah, it's a different experience, but it's still as big a thing to think about.
Yeah, and them coming through the Depression.
So very rural area?
Oh, yeah, very rural area.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's, but you ever had a job? I've never had a job.
Yeah, I've had, I did winter jobs. So, because whenever I got out of high school, my brother and I was raising hogs on contract. That fell through. And then whenever I was in high school, we started a farrow to finish hog operation. But when I got out of high school, well, then there wasn't enough on the farm, so I did wintertime jobs. So I started out in a metal shop.
Okay.
The first job I went to, they were on strike there, and as I'm pulling in the driveway, they're banging on the side of my car because I was a scab trying to get their jobs. And I drove in the driveway, done a U-turn, and I went home. I'm not experiencing this deal. We're not going to go with this.
Go with that.
Yeah.
So was your wife local or?
Yep, my wife, she was in the school south of me, and anyway, we married young. I was 21 and she was 19, and we decided that we wanted to have kids while we was young, while we still had the energy to be able to do things with kids, so that when we got older, we would be able to do those things with grandkids. So, but yeah, and she managed a medical clinic, and so. When everything had happened, then, we had 4 kids, and we were cruising along thinking that we was getting close to retirement age. We're thinking, okay, well, we're going to start kind of dealing in retirement thinking. And all 4 of our kids went to college. And the deal was with our kids was we set them down and we told them, said, listen, here's the deal. You're going to go get a job or go to school, I'm going to go to college, and get a degree in something you enjoy to do. And if you want to come back to the farm, we'll make sure we make it work. But there's not going to be enough for 4 kids, plus my brother had a son. And we said, here's how that's going to work. You hear these guys talk about, well, I'm going to split everything with my kids evenly. No, that was not the goal. Our goal was, listen, here's how this is going to work, guys. If somebody stays, then that kid is the one that's going to pour his life into this farm to keep it moving forward. So he is going to be at a point where he's going to be, his salary is going to be a lot less. He's going to take every bit of his money and pour it back into the farm. So here's how that's going to work. Whoever comes back to the farm is going to get a majority of everything at my passing and my wife's passing. And then, but what will happen is I will have a life insurance policy in place for the other 3 kids. In other words, I'll have a $3 million life insurance policy because the only thing you're going to be interested in is the cash. And the one that's left is going to need the land, he's going to need the equipment, and he's going to need all those finances and all those things behind him to make that work. And that's always been my opinion. That's always been our opinion, how we approached our kids with that process. So, and I felt like that was logical and fair. Some people probably don't think it's fair, but once those other kids are going off to college and they get a job making six figures.
It is fair, yeah.
Yeah. So, and their whole lifestyle is devoted into the farm.
So growing up, or as you raised your children, how did you balance being a father and a farmer?
Remarkably well. We done community service stuff. I was on the school board. We done Bible studies at our house. We done a lot of little league stuff, coaching, and we was on little league boards. But I can honestly say that through the entire period of time that we was farming and our kids were growing up, I can honestly say we never, at least one of us, always made it, and most generally, both of us made it to almost every event. Somehow or another, we worked that schedule around. Don't ask me how that worked, but we made it work because we felt like, here's the thing, whenever you've got kids, they're only going to be that age they are today one day. One day, that's it. So you need to be there because there'll come a point in life where it's not cool to hang out with mom and dad no more.
Yeah.
And so if you get that opportunity to spend time with them, and I've always told younger couples is that you want to focus on that child before they go to the public school setting, because you're setting their life up. The rest of their life is going to be set on what you taught them before they got into a public setting. Mm-hmm. So you set their base underneath of them at that point. So, yeah.
Yep. So can you tell us a little bit about your typical day on the farm, and then when in 2008 when you had that thing that happened, and tell us about Travis and the young man that know.
Okay. So a typical day for us was, up until 2004, we had hogs. We had an employee. But after 2004, we give up the hogs. The market crashed.
Oh, yeah.
It got really bad. So we gave that part up. But, we had, whenever we'd flipped over then, and we was doing food grade white corn, then now we're not hauling corn locally. We're hauling it 60 miles away. So we did a lot of truck driving at that point. Between that and getting equipment prepared. But in the fall of 2007, and we was always big about getting our equipment, whenever we pulled it out of the field, if we didn't have something pertaining to the crop that was growing, our equipment was going to be ready before the next season.
Yeah.
As soon as we put it in the shed, it was ready to pull out next spring or next fall and ready to be used. Well, so Travis was going to school at USI, which is the University of Southern Indiana, and he was 2 semesters away. He was going to be a teacher and a football coach and baseball in school. He was a 3-sport athlete, so he was big into sports. He was working out 5 days a week, but what happened was I had taken off and went to the farm show with a group of guys. There's about 10 of us. And my wife went to work that morning, but we had some rain that come in. And there's another part of this story that at some point we'll talk about, but I won't talk about it yet. But we're in the process of trying to write a book about everything that's happened. But Travis went back to school. We had freezing rain come in on Sunday night. We kept him at school or at home an extra day, but he should have already been back to school on Sunday night. But we had some things happen that kept him from going. And so he, I was almost to the farm show whenever a good friend of mine was the sheriff at the time. He called me and he said, "Where are you at?" And I said, "Well, I'm on my way to the farm show." He said, "Well, you need to turn around, come home. Travis has been involved in a real serious fatality, or not a fatality, but a serious accident." And so what happened was then we spun around, and I had a state police officer met me at another town, picked me up, took me to the sheriff we'd pull up into this intersection in this city, and he come in from the north, we come in from the east. They threw the lights on in the middle of the intersection. I grabbed my bags out of the back. I get in, and this guy takes me to Evansville, and the former sheriff went to where my wife was at and picked her up. And then, anyway, we all ended up at the hospital. And so what had happened was he'd went into a spin on the ice. We don't know exactly the details. He had a little Chevy or a Pontiac Grand Am. It was a 99 Grand Am, and the back bumper was pushed all the way up against the back of the front seat. And so he got hit pretty hard. We don't know if it was a semi that hit him or what happened. But when we got to the hospital, we seen him come off the elevator, and we thought, okay, he looks good. No scratches, no broken bones. And so they take him into ICU, and then we get pulled into a room with a neural doc. And he said, I'm going to tell you what. He said, I don't know if you people understand this or not, but this is pretty serious. Your son's going to be lucky to make it through the night. And I said, well, we're not sitting in our living room, and we're not sitting here eating popcorn, watching a TV show. I said, my wife works at a medical clinic, so we kind of have an idea that it's pretty serious. He said, well, here's what I'm going to tell you. He said, if he makes it through the first night, you're going to want to forget that kid was ever born. And he said, you're going to want to find a nursing facility, start searching out nursing facilities, because he's going to be stuck in a nursing facility for the rest of his life. And I kind of looked at him and said, that's the best delivery you got, right? That's how you're going to give this to us in that form. And I've had other people say, well, they got to be blunt. But no, I don't think you have to be. I don't think you have to be that blunt. I don't think you have to be that nasty about it. And so, Travis was on life support. And so it ended up that, we was in ICU for 2 weeks, and the same doctor every time I'd go in of a morning, this guy was a cusser, a screamer, and he'd have all the nurses just crying every morning, and just an awful person. And so the very first night we're there, there's a gentleman that had come in the door next to us, and he had 4 daughters, and this guy across the river had a stroke. But en route coming over, he had an aneurysm and went cold. And so this same doctor walks in and goes into this other room, and he starts cussing these girls. He said, I don't know what the hell's your guys' problem. He said, until you guys get your shit together, he said, I'll come back and talk to you, but I ain't coming to talk to you. And my wife's like, who was that? I said, that's our doctor. That's what we're dealing with. So anyway, 2 weeks later, could not get this guy to stop and talk to us. So he come out of the side. He always come out of the side door of the ICU. So I yelled at him. I said, Doc, can you give us an update? And so I go, he yells at me down the hall, and he said, I don't know what the hell you people want from me. He said, I told you when you got here, your son would never be worth anything. And he said, I've done all I can do. And my mom was there, and I put my hand, and she started to come up, and I said, Mom, I've got this. I got this. So I go down there, and I told him, I said, Doc, I said, there's one thing about your comment you made that's absolutely correct. He said, what's that? The part where you said that you've done all you can do. He said, what's that mean? I said, what that means is you're fired. I said, you've done nothing for my son since you've been here. I said, you've made no attempt to move him forward whatsoever. So I said, we're going to get another neural doc. And in due time, what we've learned over time too was that Travis had a trach tube, he had a feeding tube, and then he also had what was called an ICP tube, where they go in and they drill a hole into your skull, and then they put a tube in and they measure the pressure of your brain. His pressures never really got up all that high, but what we've learned over a period of time too is that most times whenever you have a traumatic brain injury, they normally they'll cut the skull cap off, and so to relieve the pressure. And we honestly think today that we tried to get out of that hospital and get to another one, but we couldn't get there because they wouldn't accept Travis because they didn't want the responsibility of the mistakes that we had encountered there. So, but we stayed in the hospital there we was in ICU for 2 weeks. Then we went to a step-down unit, and then we finally got back to the field. But whenever, I mentioned that we had got all the equipment and stuff ready, it worked out perfect because it's a year like this. It kept raining, but yet all of our stuff was ready to go. And so what would happen is I would haul corn, and my brother would take care of things at the farm. And then that's how I kind of contributed. But whenever we needed to go, I had to go home. So had went, and I told my wife, I said, I've got to go home. We're planting corn tomorrow. We've got to get that done.
But I bet your community rallied around you.
Yeah, they did. It was the craziest thing because they did a pancake breakfast and raised $17,000 for us. Pancakes and sausage.
I was about to say pancakes.
Yeah, nothing special. But everybody came for the reason of trying to help somebody out in a rough time. So the long story short of it was that night I went home, and Travis had moved from a step-down unit to a rehab unit But all this time, he was carrying a body temperature around, and they kept telling us it was because of the head injury. And we kept saying, it's got to be an infection. There's something going on. It's not right. So I get home that night. My wife calls me, and on the way home that night, I've got K-Love on my radio. And at this point, I'm having this battle with God. You know, I'm like, what in the world? We thought we raised our kids right. We was in church every Sunday. You know, we've done all these Bible studies. We've done this where we're promoting your word and we're pushing. And what have we done wrong? What did we do wrong that Travis deserves this and that we're put in this situation? And a song come on from Third Day. It was called "The Mountain of God," and that song talks about. I always have tough with that song, and it talks about being in the valley and coming to the top of the mountain of God. And that's when I realized it's not me. It's not my story. And I can't control it. There's some things us farmers think we can control everything, but I couldn't control it, and I had to turn it over. But I get home that night, and my wife called and said, Travis got really sick. We've had to go back to the hospital. So 2 o'clock in the morning, then it rains, so I flip around, I go back to the hospital, and it ended up then, I told my wife, I said, you go to the hotel room. And I said, I'll stay here. And I waited for 12 hours for Travis's infection doctor to show up. And this guy had been with him from day one. By this time, it's April 23rd, and his accident was on February 12th. And so what ended up happening was when he came in, he walked across the room, and I was standing behind the door, and I just slammed the door behind him. I followed him across the room, and I told him, I said, Doc, I'm going to tell you what. I don't know what's going on, but I said, he's sick. He's really sick. I said, he's went from 212 pounds, he's down to 147 pounds now. I said, he has lost a tremendous, almost 70 pounds that he's lost. And you guys keep saying it's a brain thing with this infection, with this body temperature. And I said, that's not it. There's something else. And I said, buddy, it's time for you to get off the pot. Time for you to get in the game. And I later found out that I had spooked him enough. He thought I was going to whoop him. He thought right there on the spot that I was coming after him and I was going to throw him out the window. So what they did was they ended up, and they'd done some special tests where they pulled out white blood cells, spun them out, and then reinserted them in his body. And what happens is they do an ultrasound and they find any infection. So, and what he had pneumonia, and had it from the very beginning, from almost the second week. But what happened was they give up on him. So long story short, he started making a turn then, but we feel like that the time that we spent in that hospital and not getting to a larger neural hospital in Indianapolis, we really think that really set the tone on where he's at today.
So did y'all take any steps, like any lawsuits or anything after that towards that hospital? Are there any repercussions?
No, but there were some other things that ended up happening. They put in what's called an IVC filter. And what that is that they put it in your vena cava. And what it is a filter that's supposed to catch any clots whenever you're immobile. But what we found out, that was supposed to have been removed 90 days afterwards. Several years later, Travis starts developing blood clots. And I'm in Washington, D.C., and my wife calls me and said, Travis's leg has turned black. And he never complains about pain. And so I said, well, I'm flying in. I said, as soon as I get home, I said, we'll go to Bloomington. We're not going south. We're going north this time. And so whenever we got there, the doctor brings up this x-ray, and he said, you know what that is? And it looked like a bad mitt, looked like a spider. And he said, that's in his chest. Yeah. He said, well, he's got blood clots really bad. So we're going to put him on blood thinners, and we're going to send you home. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, if he's got blood clots that bad, I hit a bump on the way home, that kid's going to die. He's going to have blood clot go through his heart. And he said, no. And I said, no, I'm going to tell you what. I said, you can do a direct admit for us to Methodist Hospital in Indianapolis. You could be a good guy and help us out here. Well, that's not my recommendation. I said, I don't care what your recommendation is. I'm telling you that we're not staying here. We're going to take the next step forward. So ended up, but once we got to Indianapolis, what we found out was that device was supposed to have been removed. By this time, Travis' accident was 2008. By this time, it's 2015. That thing was supposed to have been removed after 90 days.
So you're telling me it went through 2 separate different chains of hospitals, and none of them caught that?
Nobody caught it. No. And that was supposed to have been removed. So long story short, why we ended up that what happened was then he had to go in and do what's called an angiovac, and we tried to get him to remove that. And what they do is they just run a cable up, and it has a little fish hook on it, and they hook that, and then they normally would pull it out. And he said, I can't. He said, if I pull that out, he said, that's been there long enough. He said, that's growed into that vein. He said, if I tug on that, he said, that will break that vein loose, and that kid will bleed out on the table before I can get him cut open to repair it. So they went in and they done some things in and done this angiovac, and they was able to remove about 60% of these clots. But before we got to the surgery, that morning, his left leg was starting to turn black and blue. And the doctor said, if we don't get something done, he's going to have both legs amputated. It's coming. We got to do something quickly. So that doctor kind of saved his life at that point. But that's just part of the struggle. So, when you go through these things, and I always tell people that when they're going through things is don't let distance keep you from success. Don't think just because, what's my local hospital? I want to stay here where it's close to home. No, because some hospitals can do certain things and some can't. So yeah, and so to fast forward all that, in 2009 then, there was a group of us in the community, we decided, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to give back. We was staying in a hotel for $25 a night. But at the time, in 2008, gas was $4.60 something at that time. It's real high. So we couldn't even afford to go home. So we would stay in a hotel. And so, but what we decided to do was, okay, let's start a foundation to where we can go in and help families out. And we start where insurance stops. So what we do is we try to take that pain away from families that can create financial. Everybody thinks because I've got good insurance, when you have something happen, whether it's cancer or whatever, that I'm good. All I got to do is pay my deductible. And some people may have a $10,000 deductible, and some may get lucky enough to have $1,000, but it can turn you upside down because it's the out-of-pocket stuff that will eat you financially alive. We was still, even at one point, the community had raised $36,000 for us. And so, but we burnt through every bit of that because we lived in Chicago for 4 months, or 2 months, on Michigan Avenue. And you talk about being in an awkward spot. Take people out of a cornfield and put them on Michigan Avenue. And
I've been there.
Yeah, and that's the main strip that runs through Chicago.
Yeah.
We spent 4 months in Cincinnati at a hyperbaric oxygen treatment facility. So we had been all over the country trying to find the things that would help Travis get his life back as much as possible. And we burnt through every bit of that money and quite a bit more. But so then whenever we started the foundation, then we was just in southern Indiana.
Well, before we get into the foundation, what a story you have. And you told me earlier that you're very competitive and you needed that spirit, didn't you?
Yeah, I really did. But, once we turned it over to God, then that helped. But yet, whenever we met with several different cases where we met with therapists or doctors, they'd say, you're really coming on pretty strong. And I would look at them and say, well, first off, you got to understand something. This is the biggest situation we've been through. We got a life at stake. And I said, and number two, I'm very competitive. And I said, I hate to lose. And I said, this kid's life is too important to me to lose. And so I said, if you can't move us forward, then get out of the way because we're moving through. And I think that's a lot of what happens in situations with people that start thinking about taking their own life or whatever. Don't give up. You can't quit the game. Don't let the game get you. You got to beat the game. And even if you can find some kind of positive in it, and that's what we had to do every day was find a positive. Okay, well, today, why Travis is able to move this finger. That's a wonderful thing. Let's praise God for that. And so that's kind of what you have to do is you have to find a positive in all negative situations, or mentally you can't do it. You won't make it.
Yeah, so I give myself a challenge last week to write down 100 positive things that's happened to me in the last 3 years. I got 3 things written down. I got a long ways to go. But we have so many things we just don't recognize it. So
yeah.
Yeah.
So throughout this time, you said you would go back home, haul corn, that kind of thing. So did your brother run your farming operation while you were there? How did you said your community, but the farming community specifically, how did all of that go about?
Well, it was primarily just my brother and I. We never had any outside help. But I will say that in due time, it got ugly. At the time of Travis's accident, we was farming 3,200 acres. Before we got to 2019, we got down to 1,800 acres. And what had happened was I had people that I grew up with that I considered to be good friends that started calling my landowners. And I had landowners scattered all over the United States. And I always say that sometimes now in farming communities, we don't help out, we help them out. And when I say out,
Yep.
I mean out of business. And that's what happened, was that we had a lot of that going on. Some of the ground we lost was cash rent situations that had elevated, and the numbers didn't make sense, but there's some dirty stuff that happened. That was the sad part of all that, is that the community it got behind us in the initial beginning, but in the background, we had farmers that was playing dirty pool, and I don't take that too well. That to me is another competition thing. I don't take losing very well at all, and that's still I guess you'd call my big weakness, is that I don't do well whenever I get beat and forgive.
But
Yeah.
you had the big picture of the foundation and Travis and your family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back to the farm for 1 minute, now, do one of your sons farm the farm? Is it still around?
So what we ended up doing, my brother was 3 years older than me, and his wife was a few years older than him, and she taught school. And so she had retired quite early. She was able to retire at 55. And I'd always told my brother, I said, you've got to go to your 70 and I'm 67. Then we'll talk about retirement, unless, one of the kids decide they want to come back. So what had ended up happening was that once the kids got their education, why then, they all, they stayed in that field that they was in. Nobody wanted to come back to the farm. But my brother and I, everybody always looks at me and my brother, and we're both pretty straight to the point. And they always look at us and say, how'd you guys work together? Well, we spit it out. We said what we was thinking. We straightforward. And then we come to a common ground, and then we move forward. We had work to get done. Didn't have time to goof around, argue about things and let it dig in and cause, problems within. But he was a big help to be able to take care of some things while I was with Travis. And then, but yeah, had I not had him, and had I not farmed, I didn't have that flexible schedule,
Yeah. When you were talking about the amount of time you spent at different hospitals and stuff, I was thinking any other career you would eat through vacation days, sick days. And it was just, I feel like it was a blessing in disguise. Farming is tough year round, and farmers go through a lot of hardships. But in that situation, I think it granted you that flexibility that you needed.
Between that and the fact that my wife and I worked together as a team, and we're a very good team, and she had gave up her career for Travis, and there's some of that stuff we just don't talk too much, because we don't want Travis to feel any negative, outcome from that. But yeah, we worked together. Maybe 1 week she would go to Chicago, and I'd stay at home and take care of things. And we still had two kids in school. That was the thing.
Right.
Is we still had two high school kids. One was a freshman, the other one was a junior, and so we was still trying to keep up with their events. So we always tried to make sure at least one of us was at home with them to take care of their stuff also. So, yeah, we tag teamed it, and that's kind of how we got through that. So, but yeah, we just tried to do the best you just tried to take the best circumstance that you can and fix it the best you can. And eventually things kind of snowball, After 2012, we had a rotten crop as drought year. We had a job opportunity that came to us to run a local convenience store. So we did that, along with, at that time, we were still farming 3,200 acres, plus getting Travis to all of his therapy. He was doing therapy 3 days a week in Indianapolis at this time. So we was really, and that's what aggravating to me was whenever I said that farmers come after us. That was the bad part, was we needed those finances because we was going everywhere trying to help him get his life back. And so that was the rough part through that. But, had the two of us not been able to tag team it, there's just no way we would have survived it, and we've had that discussion, our kids, whenever we decided to retire, while we set the kids down, we said, okay. And they'd been pushing us because they wanted answers on how to take care of Travis, and we kept pushing it back. And so finally, before we decided to retire, we sat everybody down around the table and said, okay, and had the daughter-in-laws, we had everybody involved. And so the question was, does anybody want to come back? And at that point, they're asking questions of how much money is it going to take to buy you and mom out? And by the time you do that and you tell them the numbers, they're like, we make 6 figures. And the only thing we've got invested is a lunchbox. And so anyway, what ended up happening was then the conversation can moved over then to what's your expectations for the other 3 children with Travis? And Travis is in the room with us. And they said, well, here's how that works. Guys, first off, don't quit living because this come on us quick. We didn't know it one day, and the next day we're dealing with it. But keep living. And you do the best job you can to keep me and mom as good a health as possible so that we can be here as long as possible. That's all you can do. And so, and there was a lot of tears shed, and then, they're like, well, what's your wishes for Travis? There'll come a point whenever you're both not here. And we told them, said, well, here's the deal. You guys have worked, me and mom worked as a team, and there's 3 of you. And so you're going to have to work for a team, and you're going to have to do it out of love for your brother. But I said, the thing that you've got to do is put yourself in that wheelchair and say, how would I want to be treated if somebody was making decisions for me? And if you can make those decisions for him, I said, there'll be some money put away for his situation. But I said, if you can lay your head on the pillow at night and know that you did that out of respect and love for your brother, we'll be all right. We'll be all right.
Well, I appreciate your candidness about how you talk about it because life goes on, doesn't it?
Yeah.
In all situations, and everybody's facing different things. Walk us through the Travis Burkhart Foundation, and who is the first family you helped, or first person you helped, and just kind of what was that like? When was that?
Well, so the first year that it took us 1.5 years because back then it was tough to get a non-for-profit status.
Okay.
And so and everybody always talks about, oh my gosh, the IRS, but we had 2 accountants, and we had an attorney that donated all their time for us to get this all established. And what would happen is we would fill out all the paperwork, send it in, and this lady would call and she said, now listen, this is not going to fly. This is not going to work. I can't tell you what to do, but I'm going to give you a recommendation of what I would do. And we must have had 6 or more phone calls with this gal, and eventually we'd tweak it and make decisions, and we ended up with it. But when we started, we said, well, we're not going to help anybody that's not a TBI, not a traumatic brain injury. And what we found out was that in the first year, we only gave out $1,200. And what we found out was that Travis was only one of 8% that survive. 92% that goes through what Travis went through don't survive. They die, they pass away. So we had to alter that. So then we opened the scope up, and today 52% of what we do is cancer related. As we all know, cancer touches everybody. So but whenever we did that, we've got a board of 11 people. So whenever we set the guidelines, then we could vote via emails. So we send out an email, and our goal is to have help and assistance within 48 to 72 hours. So we've been plugging along doing that, and then whenever COVID hit, we all sitting around looking for something to do, and I got on TikTok. And we was right smack dab in the middle of getting ready to go through our farm equipment sale. And so I watched it for 6 months in 2020, and I told my wife, I said, we've been told we got to write a book. I said, I think this is where I got to do it. I got to tell Travis the story starting here. So I started out then, and I started telling Travis a story, and I mean, in like overnight, I had 10,000 followers real quick. So my son that's in Denver, I told my wife, I said, we've got to call him. I said, he's got kids in the house, and I said, they're going to pick that up and see that Grandpa's on TikTok. And so I call, and I told him, I said, here's the deal. I think it was 15,000 followers is what it was. And so we were on speakerphone and told him, said, well, Dad's on TikTok. Oh, my God. What? Isn't that the one where the girls are always dancing around, shaking their hind end and all that? Not necessarily. Not necessarily.
And Dad.
Yeah. And Dad's on there. What is Dad doing on TikTok? And so, my wife told him, said, listen, here's the deal. Said, he must be doing okay. He's got 15,000 followers. You people don't know what you're looking at. You're older. Maybe it's 150 followers. How long has he been on there? Just a couple weeks. Not even that long. Nah. And she said, no, I'm telling you. And he said, maybe 1,500. And she said, what's 15K mean to you? He said, holy crap, what are you talking about on there? So I told him, I said, well, we've just started telling Travis a story. And I said, it seemed to hit people, and they picked up on it, and it's took off. And so it ended up that, whenever we had our farm equipment sale, I went through every piece of equipment, every door. And that was the best advertisement that I did right there. I mean, I had a $10,000 budget set up for advertising campaign, but where do you do it? Local newspapers. Nobody reads that anymore. Nobody reads magazines anymore. You could throw it on Facebook, but I don't know that it'll get anywhere. But when I did that, and that would have been the fall that grain markets all took off and exploded, and all the equipment exploded. And we had very good equipment that was up for sale. And we ended up at 41% above appraised value.
Okay.
So whenever we decided to quit, what we decided to do was we sold a little bit of dirt to cover our debt that we had. So we sold it, and then today we cash rent everything, and then we rent out the grain system. But through this whole thing, what we didn't realize was in 2017, we lost the job at the store. They sold the store out from underneath of it. We lost a 600-acre farm all within 6 months of one another. And then by that time, we're down to 1,800 acres. And we're like, where's this headed? And what we didn't realize was that God was leading us to the foundation. He wanted us to focus on the foundation and the direction with it. But what ended up happening then was the Farm for Profit guys has a podcast in Iowa, and they picked up on it. The night of our sale, we had over 50 people in our garage that night because Tony Reed had called me in December and said, hey, there's a bunch of people off TikTok that want to come to your sale. Yeah. And he said, is it okay? And I said, sure, that's fine. So I told my wife, I said, anybody that ever comes to the farm, we always feed them. So I said, after the sale, we've got to feed all these people. It was like walking into a class reunion. Those people had never met, and that's when Farm Talk kind of took off. And then, it just kind of exploded. But then the Farm for Profit guys did a auction, and they raised $46,000 for us. And then, as you guys all know, Organics has done a fundraiser for us the last 2 years with Brian and Madison Morfeld, and they've raised $32,000 each year. And so it's took off, and we get phone calls all the time. People's doing fundraisers for us to help us out. So that's been the good thing, and it helps us to concentrate on what our mission is.
Tell me your favorite, I don't know if you can technically, but like a story that you've helped someone through the foundation.
Wow, there's several of them that, that always touches you, that you've been able to help families. But some of it too is from just phone calls of people that's struggling. And we've been able to help a couple families through those phone calls. And I don't want to mention names or put too much pressure on that, but, they're young families that had lost children in farm accidents. And then, I get random phone calls from guys that are really struggling. And always try to hook them up with some kind of Christian counseling organization. And it's always a joy to see the better side than the negative side, to see somebody that's gave up. That's the big thing. But yeah, we've helped 2,700 families now. We're at this morning. We was at $580,000. We last year alone we gave out $106,000 trying to help families get through some of these struggles. And we've got one family that. Okay, so I will give you one that will. A couple of stories, but one is that we had a guy that needed a heart transplant, and he was living at home waiting because you had to have a perfect match. He was living off of a machine. He couldn't even get out of the house. Guy finally gets a match, and his body accepts it. And we run into him at the mall about a year and a half later, and they walking out of Build-A-Bear. And so we're talking to him, asking him how he's doing. And we said, what are you guys doing in Build-A-Bear? Knew they didn't have any grandkids, knew that they had, kids in their teens.
I'm going to interject something here. Build-A-Bear should be renamed. It's Expensive Bear.
Yeah.
Been there.
Yeah.
It's a
money pit.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So what ended up happening, he said, what happened was, he said, the heart that I received was from a 27-year-old man that had died in a car accident. And his wife was pregnant with their first child. And he said, what we're going to do is we went into Build-A-Bear. They tape recorded my heartbeat. And we took that and put it in that bear, and we get to go meet the little 2-year-old boy. For Christmas, we're going to give that to him. And so that's one of those stories. And then the other story is we do an event at St. Louis Cardinals where we sell tickets. And so Travis was able to go down on the field, and he threw out first pitch in the game. So we get back up to our group. We sell 500 or 600 tickets, and this lady comes up, and she's just crying uncontrollably. And so we finally get her to calm down, and she said, do you remember who I am? No, ma'am. I said, really don't. She said, I was his nurse in ICU in Evansville, Indiana. I said, seriously? And she said, yeah. But she said, you know the kicker of this? And I, nope. She said, they had told us that he died. And she said, I'm in a luxury suite on the other side of the stadium, and I hear his name, and I remembered him, and I look down, and I see him standing on the mound throwing first pitch out. I lost my mind, and I told them people, I got to find them. I've got to tell them. And she said, when I seen him, I've been in ICU for 25 years, she said, and I was getting burned out because I didn't think I was making a difference. But seeing that kid down there throwing that first pitch when they told us he died, she said, I could do my job another 25 years. So,
and I know you just got hundreds of those kind of stories.
Yeah, we do. We could go on all day, and I know you guys are going to run out of time here real soon. So,
yeah. So, what's the best way to help our listeners could help your foundation? Best ways to get involved or give or
yeah. We do a couple events. We do the Cardinal event. We do a golf scramble, and anybody that buys tickets, that's a big help. And then anybody that wants to help out at those events, the Cardinal one is kind of takes care of itself. But we're always looking for help. We're always looking for people to. We've had people call us from all over the United States doing fundraisers for us. We got a tractor pull coming up in September that a group's doing for us. 2 years ago, we had another tractor group that put some money together for us. So, and then we've got people that do monthly donations, and all they got to do is go to TravisBurkhartFoundation.com, and there's a tab there. That you go to, and it'll give you that opportunity to do PayPal or Venmo or whatever, however that source you want to use. But that's how that all kind of takes place. But that's how we keep doing what we do. And anytime we get that help, then that helps us to focus on what we got to do. So we just one of those things where, it's been amazing to sit back and watch how God has put people in our path. And we've been so blessed from it. We could have took the other side of it and said, we're just going to quit, But we wanted to be able to give something back to people, and that's kind of where we're at. And if you've got somebody that needs assistance, all you got to do is go to that same web page, and on the right-hand side, it'll say, how can we help? And you punch that, and it'll bring up a form, fill that out, and then we'll put it before the board, and we'll see if we can get you some help. But we've got families that we've helped for over 10 years. And so, what we try to do is we give money in smaller increments rather than large amounts of money. And that way it kind of helps them as they go through, because some of these can be a long period of time.
Yeah.
Yep. So in wrapping up here today, I mean, we've talked about ag's tough right now. So let's dig into your competitive spirit. for people that are really struggling in ag and, just working their hands and really not being able to see the light. So you found a way to find the light in your tough situation. So share with our listeners about that.
Well, keep in mind that whenever I started, it was in the 80s, and it was a weekly event to go to farms that had been foreclosed on. And so, and at that time, Federal Land Bank in our area was a big part of that. They was foreclosed on people that probably should have never been foreclosed on, but they was pushing money. And that's what I tried to tell people through the last 4 or 5 years, whenever it started in 2020. Pay some taxes. Don't worry about it. Put some money away, but pay the taxes. And for younger guys, or it doesn't necessarily have to be younger guys, it's in farming, but put blinders on when you drive down the road. Don't look at what the neighbor's doing. Don't look at that nice shiny green paint or that. Don't do that. Stay within your finances. Do the best you can and find out what your strengths and weaknesses are. And if your weakness is that working with finances, hire an accountant. Take that strain off yourself. Find out what you're good at and focus on that. But stay within your numbers the best you can. I mean, we turned. I had farms that I gave back because they wasn't making money. And so, and we had guys coming in, bidding $70 more on one certain farm, and we'd been farming it 5 years and only made money 3 out of the 5. And I told the landowner, I said, this is where 2 fools have bet. and he got upset. And I said, what that means is if they're foolish enough to offer it to you, you're a fool if you don't take it. And I said, I'll walk away from it because we didn't make any money anyway. So that's what I would tell guys is to get lean, do the best you can, but don't ever give up. And then, some of the most valuable experiences that you will learn from is your failures, as long as they're not astronomical. Yeah. Anything that you've done in life, as long as you can kind of bounce through those and learn something from them, and that's how that works. But guys just got to stay within it. Make cuts where you can, and hope that you can survive for. I mean, it's really weird that we're happy to survive another year.
Yeah,
know?
Well, and behave on TikTok. Exactly. You don't want to get in trouble there.
That's right. That'll get you in big trouble. But yeah.
So how many people you have on TikTok?
Over 60,000.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'm not a Tony with. Yeah. But when I got on TikTok too, I said that I would never ever. Had a couple things. I said I would never talk politics, I'd never talk religion, and I would never cuss because I didn't want that little old lady sitting beside me at church that was 80 years old, because there is 80-year-olds on TikTok that say, hey, I've watched your stuff. You need to calm it down.
All right, I have one more question and we're going to end it. Mm-hmm. How is Travis now?
Travis is he's remarkable in the fact that whenever I talked about he went to the gym and worked out 5 days a week, God was preparing him for the biggest battle of his life. And that's what it was. And he was physically so strong. So he goes to weightlifting events now, and it's not Special Olympic stuff. He goes with anybody else. And his last event that he did, he bench pressed 300, and his personal best was 336 pounds. And he'll win his class, his weight class. And they'll always, the first time I get him up on the stage, they're, oh, that's nice that the guy in the wheelchair, he's getting up there, he's lifting, and they feel sorry for him. But then at the end, whenever he whoops them, then they're like, how's this? What's his story? So he tell his story, But the cool thing is through TikTok, we've had a special thing happen that through TikTok, a great big group of them, I'd always get approached by a group called Agribility. Every farm show we go to, because we go to farm shows, we have booths, and they'd always say, what can we do? And I said, I want a track chair for that kid. I want him to be able to come to the farm, help me do whatever we got to do, get all over the farm. They'd never followed through. So they had come to me when I was in Boone, Iowa last year, and I just finally told them, I said, we're going to be okay. Don't worry about it. Well, God closes one door, opens another. What little bit did I know that a month earlier, a group of them had started raising money, and they got $23,000 together, and in February, 2 guys show up in our driveway and completely blew us away. And there was about probably close to 50 people on Farm Talk that ended up that they bought that kid a track wheelchair. And it's the coolest thing. Now him and his dog can go for walks and just go all over the farm.
That's great.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you for sharing your story, sharing Travis's story. and just being so open and honest and vulnerable about it. I mean, hearing what you went through and then looking at what we struggle with or what we see as our main problems, it shows what we take for granted. And I want to thank you for coming on and joining us and just sharing everything.
I appreciate that. Life can be fragile.
It
depends on how much we want to break that ice. So,
Yep.
yeah.
So look up Mike on TikTok.
Yep. It'd be under Farming TBI Dad, or just be under Mike Burkhart. But yeah.
And then put out the foundation again.
TravisBurkhartFoundation.com. But we appreciate any help that we can get.
Yeah. So we'll be definitely givers, and so
Appreciate that.
Good to meet you and do this.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me.
Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed it. The Travis Burkhart Foundation, if you want to be a part of our foundation where we're trying to help families succeed and start where insurance stops at, you go to TravisBurkhartFoundation.com and research our website, and there's a number of ways that you can help us out. But number one is if you can throw a prayer in there, because there's so many families that we help that need a prayer and really need that spiritual lift and need God's hands on their family. But if you can go to that, you can give monthly, you can make a one-time donation, or you can become a sponsor. We have a sponsorship program, and you can go there and be a part of our team, and that's how we grow the way we grow is through the support of all those around us.